The northern expanse was a world of endless white. Mountains speared the clouds, their peaks encased in centuries-old ice. Vast glaciers groaned under the weight of millennia, splitting slowly in the eternal cold, and in the distance the aurora shimmered across the midnight sky like rippling curtains of green and blue, casting an unearthly glow over the snowfields below. Beneath this frozen sky lay Vrindrel, a kingdom built on stone and stubbornness. Its walls were thicker than any in the south, carved from frostbitten granite and reinforced with steel mined. From the mountains, fires burned constantly in the hearts, yet the chill always found its way into the bones of those who lived here. Legends in Vrindrel told of the Skjoldrir, the ice dragons, creatures older than the kingdoms themselves. They were said to slumber beneath the glaciers, their scales shimmering like frozen sapphire, their breath colder than the void between stars. Once, long ago, they had ruled the skies, their wings blotting out the sun. But centuries had passed without a sighting. Most believed they were nothing more than myth, until the whispers began. It started with the hunters. Men returned from the tundra speaking of shadows moving across the snow without a source. They claimed to hear low, rumbling calls echoing through the mountains, too deep to be the cry of any beast they knew. One hunter swore he had seen a massive eye staring at him through the ice, a vertical slit of pale blue, unlinking. The king of Vrindrel, Ulrich Frostbane, dismissed these tales at first. He had ruled for 30 winters and knew well that fear thrived in the cold. But then the storms began, storms unlike any the kingdom had seen. They swept in without warning, walls of white that swallowed entire villages. And in the silence that followed, strange shapes were found in the snow, enormous claw marks, each the size of a man's chest. Ulrich summoned his war council. Torches flickered against the frozen stone of the great hall as his advisors spoke in hushed tones. They spoke of ancient prophecies carved into glacier caves, warnings of the awakening of the Skjoldrir, a time when the ice would crack and the dragons would rise again. Bringing an age of war and frost, standing at the edge of the council chamber, was Kellen Thrinn, a young warrior with eyes like winter steel. He had been raised on stories of the ice dragons, and unlike most, he believed them. When the council debated endlessly, Kellen stepped forward. If the Skjoldrir have returned, he said, his voice carrying in the cold air, we cannot hide behind our walls. We must seek them out before they seek us. Ulrich studied him for a long moment. The old king had seen countless men fall to the cold and the wilds. But something in Kellen's gaze spoke of a different kind of resolve, and so it was decided. A small company would be sent beyond the borders of Vrindrel, across the glacier passes, into the heart of the frozen wilderness to find the truth behind the whispers. As Kellen prepared for the journey, the wind howled through the battlements, like the cry of something ancient, something waking. Far to the north, beneath miles of black ice, a great eye opened. The frozen veil was eerily silent that morning, the kind of silence that made soldiers shift uneasily and clutch their weapons tighter. Overhead, the sky churned with dense clouds, the color of tarnished silver, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. The frost-laden wind carried whispers, faint, almost inaudible, but to the seasoned warriors of the north it was an omen. Lord Lionfang, commander of Frosthold's armies, stood atop the icy battlements, his fur lined, cloak snapping in the wind. His sharp, ice-blue eyes scanned the horizon. They're coming, he muttered, his voice low, as if speaking louder might invite the very thing he dreaded. From beyond the glaciers, an unnatural storm was forming. Snow spun in violent spirals, glowing faintly with an unholy light. It wasn't just weather. It was magic, and at the heart of that storm, something massive moved. The shape was still indistinct, but the sheer scale of it made Kell's stomach tighten. Below in the courtyard, Queen Alara Frostspire, sovereign of the Northern Crown, emerged from the hall of ice. She wore a gown of deep sapphire silk, embroidered, with silver threads that shimmered like frost under the pale light. Despite the cold, her expression burned with determination. "Kale," she called, "send word to the outposts, triple the watch." "I will summon the cryomancers." Kale descended to her side, his boots crunching on the permafrost. "My queen, if this is what I think it is, no number of watchmen will matter." He glanced upward. As the storm's whispers grew louder, almost shaping into words in an ancient tongue, Elara's hand tightened round the crystal-tipped staff she carried. "Then we will be ready, whether it matters or not. This is our home, and if the ice worms truly rise again, we will not yield it without drowning the snow in blood." At that moment, a deafening crack split the air, not thunder, but the sound of ice fracturing. A colossal glacier on the far side of the vale was breaking apart, chunks the size of keeps tumbling into the abyss below from the rift that opened. A blinding blue light erupted, searing against the grey sky. The wind's whispers became screams, and then wings too massive, jagged wings of pure ice unfolded from the chasm, scattering frost like shattered glass into the gale. Kale felt the weight of history crushing down on him. The legends had been true, and they had just woken something far worse than any man could fight. The blizzard had not eased for 3 days, and yet Suat's army marched ever upward. The frost-peak mountains loomed before them like an unbroken wall of white, their jagged ridges vanishing into a shroud of snow-filled clouds. The air here was so cold it felt like it could shatter inside the lungs, and the sound of every breath crystallized into a faint hiss before vanishing in the wind dot at the front. Captain Kale urged his frost-bound warhorse forward, his armor coated in a fine sheen of rime. "We are close," he called to his soldiers, though his voice was nearly lost in the howling gale. "The summit of frost is just ahead." They reached a narrow pass-a-knife edge of ice overlooking an abyss. The drop was so sheer. The wind seemed to pull at them, threatening to fling them into the darkness below. Ice bridges, older than the kingdom itself, arched between the peaks, their surfaces slick and treacherous. Sroth himself strode across the first bridge, his heavy boots leaving prints that froze instantly. His eyes cold as glacier glass swept across the path. "Stay close," he warned, "and do not look down. The frost beneath us has taken many lives." But the danger was not only from below. As they reached the halfway point, the winds roared deepened into something else, something unnatural. A shadow moved through the storm. Then, with a deafening crack, a massive shard of ice exploded from the mountain face, revealing a pale, scaled creature clinging to the CLIFFSID. It was no ordinary beast. Its wings were shredded by ancient scars, its body half encased in frost, and yet its eyes burned with a frozen rage. An ice worm, older than the kingdom's history, had awoken from its slumber. The soldiers faltered, gripping their weapons as the worm let out a sound like glaciers grinding together. Snow poured from its jaws, and the temperature plummeted even. Further frost forming on the soldiers' eyelashes in seconds. Soroth drew his blade. Its steel rhymed with magical frost runes. "It guards the path to the summit," he said grimly, "and it will not let us pass." Kale tightened his grip on his spear, his breath steaming in the frigid air. "Then we fight, my king, and so." In the heart of the storm, on a bridge of ancient ice, steel met claw, and the mountain itself seemed to shudder under the fury of the battle. The expedition marched on through the blizzard, the biting wind screaming like a banshee over the jagged peaks, snow-crusted over their furs and armor. And every breath turned to ice in their beards, the sound of boots crunching through the frozen crust was the only thing breaking the silence until it wasn't. From the shadow of a massive ice boulder, a faint shimmer of movement caught Kellen's eye. He raised a gloved hand, signaling the caravan to halt. His instincts, honed from years of battle in the northern wilds, told him something was wrong. Then the snow erupted. A beast unlike anything they had seen before lunged from the drifts. Frostfang worm, its body plated with scales as pale as glacier glass, its eyes glowing with a cold and natural light. It wasn't one of the fabled ice dragons they sought, but a lesser servant of them, bred for ambush and slaughter. Shields, formation, Kellen's voice cut through the wind. The worm's jaws snapped down, tearing through the lead sled in a spray of splintered wood end. Scattered supplies. Men scrambled back, shields raised. But the monster's whip-like tail cracked through the air, sending two soldiers flying into the snowbank. Ira's voice rose in an incantation, and the runes on her staff blazed an icy blue. She slammed it into the ground, sending jagged shards of ice erupting upward to pierce the worm's side. It shrieked, thrashing, its blood steaming as it hissed onto the frozen ground. Kellen and two warriors seized the moment, rushing in with axes. Steel bit into scaled flesh, and the beast recoiled. But it didn't retreat, it fought harder, twisting with unnatural speed. The battle was chaos snow kicked into blinding flurries. The stench of cold-blooded reptile filling the air, and the sound of steel ringing against unyielding armor. Finally, with a roar that shook the cliffs, Kellen drove his axe deep into the worm's throat. The creature spasmed once, then collapsed, its blood seeping into the snow like liquid sapphire. Hera approached, her expression grim. They're sending guardians now. The dragons know we're coming. Kellen wiped the blood from his weapon and looked to the storm ahead. Somewhere beyond the next ridge lay their true enemy, beasts far deadlier than this, and the cold, he realized, was only getting worse. The blizzard had not ceased for 3 days. Its howling winds clawed at the mountain ridges like the cries of restless spirits, ice-laden trees bent under the weight of frost. And the valleys lay buried under layers so deep that even the tallest sentinels of pine were swallowed whole. Within this white wasteland, the armies of Frosthelm and Scarvel moved in slow, grinding marches, their banners whipping violently in the wind. Their armor coated with sheets of rime, Lord Keller of Frosthelm stood at the crest of an icy cliff, his breath spilling in white clouds. Below him, the enemy was advancing, a sea of dark shapes moving through the storm, their torches like scattered embers in an endless void of snow. He could see their siege engines struggling against the frost, each wheel frozen and cracking with every turn. Yet the enemy pressed forward with grim determination, for both sides knew this battle was more than a war of kings. It was a war for the heart of the icebound throne itself. The throne, forged from an unmelting shard of the eternal glacier, was said to hold dominion over the 3 ice dragons that roamed the frozen skies. Whoever possessed it would command their allegiance, turning the balance of the world. And now, with rumors spreading that the dragons had been sighted again after a century of absence, desperation burned brighter than any fire in these frozen lands. Keller's lieutenant, Sir Draven, approached, his face half covered by a hood of white fur. "They've brought the Frostbreakers," Draven said grimly. "Massive battering rams reinforced with runic steel. They'll try to shatter the south gate before nightfall." Keller's gaze drifted to the distant shapes, then upward to the sky. The blizzard thickened, but within its swirling chaos he thought he saw something. Vast wings, cutting through the storm like shadows upon shadows. His heart thudded. The old stories whispered that the dragons often came when the snow fell heaviest, their forms hidden in the storm, until it was too late. "Sound the horns," Keller ordered. "If the dragons come, this field will be more than just a graveyard of men." As the army prepared, far across the battlefield, in the enemy camp, Lord Veric of Scarvel knelt before a strange figure draped in frost-stained robes. This was the Ice-Seer, an ancient sorcerer whose eyes glimmered with the cold light of prophecy. They have seen the storm as a curse, the seer murmured, but it is a herald. The dragons stir, Veric. And when they descend, blood will freeze before it. Spills, Veric's lips curled into a cruel smile. Then let Frosthelm break itself against the storm. We will claim the throne, and the beasts. That night, as darkness swallowed the white expanse, the storm reached its peak. The winds howled with an almost living rage, the snow tearing through the air like shards of glass, and then, from the blackened heavens, came a sound deeper than thunder, older than mountains, a roar that shook the marrow of every man's bones. Keller gripped the hilt of his sword, his breath catching. The dragons had come. The news of Frostbane's march spread through the icy winds like a plague of fear. By the time the Frostfang clans war drums thundered across the tundra, every soul in Frostvale knew what was coming. From the watchtowers, the sight was both breathtaking and horrifying, an endless army of armored frosthawks, ice trolls wielding clubs of frozen bone, and skeletal warriors wreathed in pale mist. Above them, Frostbane's silhouette blotted out the stars, his massive wings whipping up snowstorms with each beat. The defenders of Frostvale moved with grim purpose. On the outer walls, ballista tipped with shards of enchanted ice were mounted, each capable of piercing the hide of lesser dragons. Mages in heavy fur-lined robes lined the battlements, their staffs glowing with runes of protection. Captain Kellen paced behind them, his armor shimmering with a faint blue aura. "Hold the line until the horns sound," he commanded. "We do not break before then." When the first wave hit, it was chaos howling. Orcs slammed against the gates. Ladders were thrown against the walls, and arrows rained down like sleet. The air itself seemed to freeze with the presence of Frostbane as he swooped low, his roar shattering chunks of ice from the fortress's walls. Each blast of his frigid breath froze entire ranks of defenders where they stood, their bodies locked forever in statues of ice. Princess Sellara fought among her people, her twin blades cutting arcs of silver through the enemy ranks. Her strikes were guided by both skill and desperation, for she knew the walls could not hold forever. Beside her, Lord Arik conjured blizzards to blind the attackers, though his power waned with each passing minute. Then, as the third assault began, his sound split the night, not the horns of Frostvale, but the deep, resonant call of something far older. From beyond the northern cliffs, a sheep emerged, an enormous dragon, white as moonlight, its scales glimmering like glass. The defenders gasped, unsure whether this was salvation or the final blow. High above the battlefield, Frostbane's eyes narrowed. He recognized the newcomer, and if the legends were true, their meeting would not end without blood. The war drums of the north had not sounded in nearly 2 centuries, yet that night they thundered across the frozen horizon, from the battlements of Frostspire. The great citadel carved into the heart of a glacier. Soldiers peered into the white expanse. A storm was coming, not of snow, but of steel and wings. The Ice Dragon Legion had taken to the skies again. Their leader, Vareth the Pale, soared at the head of the formation, his scales like shards of diamond reflecting the cold moonlight. Each beat of his colossal wings sent gales of freezing wind toward the kingdom below. Behind him, a swarm of lesser frost drakes followed, their piercing shrieks echoing across the valleys. Inside Frostspire's throne hall, King Aldrich stood over the massive war map, his breath forming icy plumes. Round him, his council debated furiously. Some urged the gates to be sealed and the armies kept inside the walls. Others called for a charge into the blizzard to strike the enemy before they reached the gates. "This is not just an army, it is winter itself marching toward us," Aldrich growled. "If Frostspire falls, The whole ice realm will follow. The first wave of the siege began before dawn. The enemy's war horns howled through the frozen winds, and shadows of wings swept. Across the walls, arrows tipped with fire were loosed into the sky. But the flames hissed and died in the snowstorm conjured by the dragons. Ice bolts rained down from the drakes. Piercing armor and shattering shields, from the east tower, Lady Srenya the Queen's champion and master of the Frostblade leapt into the fray. Her sword glowed with runes of ancient ice magic, each swing freezing her enemies in jagged sculptures of death. Yet even she could see the tide turning. The enemy was relentless, their beasts swarming the skies. Then, a roar split the heavens, a roar deeper and older than Vared's. From the north came a shadow larger than any living creature the people of Frostspire had ever seen. It was not a dragon of ice, but something far older, something that had slept beneath the glaciers since the first dawn of the world, and it had awoken. The sky above the Frostspire had turned into a swirling maelstrom of ice and shadow. Snow fell in heavy, blinding sheets, twisting in the wind like 1,000 silver knives. The towering citadel carved from ancient, glacial stone stood defiant against the elements, its spires reaching for the heavens like frozen fingers. For centuries, it had been the heart of the Icebound Kingdom, a place of wisdom, magic, and unbroken will. Now, it was under siege. From the far ridges, war horns bled a deep, guttural sound that seemed to shake the very bones of the mountain. Legions of the Ashfang horde poured across the frozen plain, their dark armor rimmed with frost, their weapons forged from the blackened steel of volcanic forges. The enemy's banners of crimson serpent coiled round a broken crown snapped violently in the wind. At their head rode warlord Kelric, his massive wolf-skin cloak snapping behind him, his eyes burning with the cold fire of conquest. Behind him came the Frostbane, a massive battering ram tipped with the skull of a slain frost dragon, enchanted to shatter even the strongest icebound gates inside the Frostspire. The defenders prepared for the coming storm. Archers lined the battlements, their bows strung with enchanted sinew, arrows tipped with shards of purest frost. The ice-god elite warriors clad in silver-blue plates stood ready with halberds, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Runic mages etched glowing sigils into the stone, calling upon the ancient wards that had guarded the citadel since its founding. And at the highest balcony, Queen Srenya herself watched the horizon, her long white hair whipping about her face like strands of winter light. Her sapphire eyes were calm, but inside her heart pounded. She knew this was no ordinary battle. From the north came a sound unlike any other, a deep, resonant cry that made even the bravest warrior freeze for a heartbeat. It was a dragon's roar, not one, but many. From the swirling clouds descended the icebound flight, 3 colossal frost dragons, their wings the size of city streets, their scales shimmering like shards of diamond. They were led by Vildrith, the oldest and mightiest of their kind. His breath a storm that could freeze armies solid in a heartbeat. They circled the citadel, their piercing blue eyes scanning the approaching horde. The enemy did not falter. Warlord Kelric raised his blade high, and the horde surged forward, their war cries mixing with the howling wind. The Frostbane slammed into the great gates once, twice each strike shaking the very walls. The wards held. For now, suddenly, a blinding flash tore through the storm clouds above. A second force had arrived, not allies, but something far worse. From the southern sky came the shard wraiths, a spectral army bound in chains of cursed ice. They moved like a living blizzard, each wraith a shrieking, hollow-eyed horror that could pass through walls and flesh alike. Someone had unleashed them, and their arrival meant only one thing. The siege was about to become a massacre. Queen Srenya turned to her general, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Signal the Frostspire's heart. Wake the sleeper, deep beneath the citadel, in a chamber of ice older than time. Something began to stir. Something colossal. Something ancient. The storm above intensified. Lightning crackling between the clouds like veins of frozen fire. The first of the shard wraiths slammed into the walls, their ghostly claws raking through the stone. The frost bane struck the gates. Again this time, a fracture spread like a spiderweb across the enchanted ice dot, and then, from the depths, a roar so deep it shook the mountain to its core. The sleeper was awake. The next moment would decide the fate of the Iceborne Kingdom. The night sky above the frozen expanse was ablaze not with fire, but with shimmering veils of icy light. The aurora rippled like ghostly banners, casting an ethereal glow over the battlefield below. The armies of the Frostborn Alliance had gathered in full force before the colossal black gates of Frostbane Keep, the last bastion of the Worm King's loyalists. Snow swirled in violent gusts, stinging the faces of soldiers and making every torch gutter in the wind. Commander Kellen paced the front lines. His armor rhymed with frost from both the air and the magic that had been gathering for days. His breath came in heavy clouds as he looked up at the towering ice walls. Somewhere beyond those walls, the frost worms waited, great serpents of the old age, sworn to defend the tyrant Lord Arveth, the last living Iceworm King. "Hold steady," Kellen shouted, his voice echoing through the gale. "We strike when the horns sound, and not before." From the high battlements, icy silhouettes shifted in the gloom. Archers prepared their bows, and strange, chittering figures snow ghouls skittered along the parapets. Above them all, the shadow of something massive moved, wings spread wide, frost and moonlight glinting off its scales. It was Striker, the oldest of Arvath's lieutenants. A dragon whose breath could turn steel brittle as glass. He took flight, circling like a glacier-sized vulture, his roar shaking the very snow beneath the soldiers' boots. The horns finally blared a deep, mournful note that rolled across the ice plain like thunder. Siege towers, reinforced with frozen oak and bound in steel, began their slow crawl forward. Ballista cranked into position, their bolts tipped with enchanted obsidian meant to pierce even dragonhide. The first wave of frost magic came from the walls, a shimmering storm that turned men into statues mid-charge. Shouts of alarm rang out, but the mages of the Alliance stepped forward, countering with blinding flashes of fire and arcs of lightning that split the darkness. Then came the dragons. From the keep's gates burst 3 colossal beasts, their scales glinting like shards of a frozen sea. The air around them cracked and sang with the intensity of their cold. Soldiers scattered, shields raised, as one dragon's breath swept across the field, freezing entire ranks in jagged blocks of ice. Another slammed its tail down, sending a shockwave that shattered siege engines like toys. But the Alliance held. Kellen himself led the charge, his great sword blazing with molten runes, cutting through frost-forged steel and striking deep into the hide of the smallest one. Screams and roars mingled, the snow turning crimson beneath the boots of the fallen as the battle raged. A deafening crack split the night. The gates of Frostbane Keep had been breached. A rush of soldiers poured into the courtyard, only 2, be met with a wall of spears and a storm of arrows from above. In the chaos, Kellen caught sight of Arveth himself emerging from the shadows, his massive body coiled, his horns crowned with ice-like jagged spires. The Iceworm King's voice rolled like an avalanche. "You dare bring fire into my realm. You will find only death here. Mortal." Kellen tightened his grip on his blade. The air was so cold his armor was stiffening, but his resolve burned hot. "This ends tonight, Arveth." The 2 forces clashed again, and above it all, the aurora flared brighter, as if the very sky was watching the fate of the ice realm unfold. The battle had reached its peak, but victory was far from certain. The battlefield was a shattered wasteland of ice and ruin. Jagged shards of frozen earth jutted from the ground like the bones of some ancient titan. The once proud banners of the Frost Kingdom now lay stiff and brittle, encased in rime, fluttering. No more. The air was so cold it felt like it could slice through skin. Each breath a dagger in the lungs. King Keller stood at the heart of the devastation, his silver crown rimmed with frost. His armor gleaming in the pale light of the eternal winter sun. His sword, Frostbane, was still humming from the magic that had cleaved the head from the great worm of the east in the battle just hours before, round him. The last remnants of his army tended to the wounded, their breath rising in misty plumes. As they moved between the dead and dying dot above, the sky churned in a swirling dance of snow and storm. The last of the 3 ancient ice dragons Virth, the blizzard's heart circled high above, his wings blotting out what little sunlight remained. Keller could feel the dragon's mind pressing against his own, a deep, rumbling voice echoing. In his thoughts, "You have proven your strength, mortal king." Virth's voice resonated like the shifting of glaciers. But the frost age is not yet over. What comes next will decide the fate of all realms' fire, ice, and the blood between them. From the far horizon came a sight none had expected. The black banners of the Ashen South. The Fire Kingdom had arrived, their ships crashing through the frozen waves, their hulls steaming in the deadly cold. Leading them was Queen Serenia, the Ember Slayer, her eyes burning like coals under a steel crown. She dismounted before Keller, her fur cloak dusted with snow. The 2 rulers faced each other. Old enemies bound by a new, grim understanding. "It seems," she said, her voice sharp as steel, "that we are both too stubborn to die before killing the dragons." Keller gave a cold smile. "Or perhaps we are too wise to fight each other while a greater storm brews." The uneasy alliance was forged in that moment, ice and fire, standing shoulder to shoulder against the wrath of something far older than either kingdom. Night fell quickly in the frostlands. Under the pale light of the twin moons, Keller and Serenia stood before Virth, the great dragon bowing his massive head. The balance must be restored, the dragon spoke. Frost curling from his maw, the frost age has lingered too long. I will retreat beyond the northern wall of storms. But one day I will return, when the world has forgotten what winter truly means. With a final deafening roar, Virth launched himself skyward, his vast body vanishing into the clouds. The wind that followed was so cold it crystallized the very air, leaving a lingering silence in its wake. When the storm settled, Keller and Serenia looked at one another, knowing that their kingdoms could not remain allies forever. But for now, the war was over. The frost age was ending, yet deep in the northern ice, far beyond the reach of man, an ancient heartbeat still pulsed beneath. The glacier slow, steady, patient, for winter always returns.